just graduated college and landed the perfect job. She had a great group of friends, and one night she went out, had a few drinks. Everything was well, everyone was happy. But, maybe not to your surprise, she decided that I'm going to go and drive home myself. I only had 2 drinks. I'm not intoxicated. I can see and walk straight. And she took off in her car, and as she went down the road and to her house, around a corner, she lost control of her vehicle and hit another car head on. When she hit this car head on, the person driving that car was ejected from the car. She, uninjured, got out and went and found that man, and that man took his last breaths in her arms. Doing the right thing, she called the police, not thinking about herself, but thinking about what had just occurred. The police had come, they had done a sobriety test, found that she was intoxicated. She was later thrown into jail, and then later appeared in front of a judge, and then later found herself at Cheetah for 10 years for vehicle manslaughter. Kate, 43, had been in and out of the prison system, probation and parole throughout most of her life. She had many OWIs, theft charges, you name it, she had it. By her time she had her OWI 7, she found herself at Cheetah. But she never caused any damage to anybody else, at least what she thought, with her vehicles. She never had any injuries or injuries to herself. And she definitely did not kill anyone, but 7 times she was caught with being intoxicated over in the car. But she has no shame, for it was just drinking and driving. And in Wisconsin, drinking and driving is something that everybody does. Joyce, a mother of 2, had been abused in childhood. And maybe not to some of your surprise, she found a husband that also abused her and even abused her 2 children. One day, she was getting ready to leave her husband. She said that enough was enough, but he had threatened to take the children away from her. She had threatened to do the worst thing possible, tell a judge that she was the one abusing the children. So one day, while her husband was getting ready in the morning and shaving, Joyce took a knife and stabbed her husband. Luckily, her husband did not die, and she is now serving time at Cheetah for attempted murder. Sandra, at 19 years old, was a drug addict from an early age. She watched her friend die in front of her on drugs that she had given him, because her friend just wanted to have that high, have that escape, have that sense of euphoria that only heroin can give. And she knew the same thing. But she also knew that every time her and her friend would partake in heroin, there was always a chance that something would not go right. And this one day with Sandra and her friend, he died on that overdose. She's in prison now, not just for charges of drugs, but also for aiding in the murder of her friend. When I started working for corrections 6 years ago, before becoming a chaplain, I had this mentality that I was so much better than anybody that was on paper, as we say. Someone on probation or parole, and definitely better than anybody that was incarcerated. See, I was never thrown in prison. I never got an OWI. I never did drugs. I never stole, as I say, because I stole. But never got caught in the end. I went through life thinking that I was great and all these other people had problems. In fact, I had never planned on working in corrections. I had said while working on my undergrad in comparative religions and philosophy that I would maybe become a chaplain someday, but I would never serve those people. I would never work with those people. I would rather work in hospice. I would rather work with people dying. I would rather work with addicts who are not in trouble, but I will never go to prison. I'll never stay there. I'll never work with them because they deserve what they're having there. My first day working at the probation and parole office, I was overwhelmed with, I guess you could say, almost anxiety and shock, because as people were coming in that were not only addicts, but people who were released from prison, people who had families and jobs, people who had struggled throughout life, people who were trying to make things right and do well in their journey, I found that they looked no different than me. In fact, we were one and the same. They, yes, maybe got caught for something. But in the end, we were both broken. We were both people trying to discover what is the meaning of life? What is the purpose of our lives? Why do we do the things we do, and why don't we do the things we should do? In fact, this shock that came over me required me to actually go to professional counseling because it totally rattled my worldview. No longer was I seeing people who were different from me. I was seeing how we're all connected. We're all the same. We're all just trying to live our lives. And while we may think that our choices are maybe made for us or that we are choosing to do the things that are wrong, often in our lives, it's our experiences that lead to those choices. And that's a whole other topic about whether we have free choice or not. But the picture of the diamond, the story of the diamond, is a story that came to mind as I was trying to prepare this conversation about spirituality in the prison. Because in the eye of the beholder, you may see something ugly. I had saw ugliness in the people that were in prison, the people that were on probation and parole, but they may have seen beauty, or others have seen beauty. And what I may have saw as beauty, someone may have seen as ugliness. As the story had told, the king thought everything in his kingdom, not just the people, but everything else was not good. It wasn't beautiful. The only thing in the kingdom that was beautiful was that diamond. But it's not until the end of the story when that diamond appears to be flawed that jeweler, that old man says, no, that diamond had never been beautiful. That diamond had always been broken. That diamond had always needed something more. And he brought that beauty to it. In many regards, we're all like that diamond, both flawed and its perfect beauty. Now, what am I all talking about? Well, first let me introduce myself, as some of you already said. My name is Zachary. I am the chaplain at the Cheetah Correctional Institution. And I have been there for 4 years now. It's always hard when I do different talks at different places, I never know what to expect from the community. And being a UU congregation, I have a feeling that you appreciate and have an understanding more that religion and spirituality aren't always the same. In fact, a lot of times they're completely on opposite spectrums. But I didn't always have that understanding. As I kind of said before, I did study comparative religions and philosophy in my undergrad work at UW-Stevens Point. But I grew up in a very conservative evangelical Free Church of America church. If anyone knows what that is, it's a very conservative evangelical Christian church is really what it is. I also had some Salvation Army in me in my early days. But, through my life journey, and we're all on life journeys, some further along than others, I had come to see the world a little bit differently. I was fortunate. I'm not sure if it happens here in Fond du Lac. I'm guessing not. But I was fortunate in Sheboygan, where I grew up, to have a philosophy class, actually 3 philosophy classes in high school and 1 comparative religion class in high school. And it was in high school that I started to understand that everybody is a little bit different, and everybody comes to different realizations based on their experiences. And I started to come to this understanding of how can one religion be right over another, pretty much writing off billions of people. And so I found myself at UW-Stevens Point trying to answer this question. And this question just kept going deeper and deeper, and I just found myself wanting to hold on to my belief system, because sometimes it's easier to lump yourself into one club and just kind of write everybody else off. But as I mentioned, when I got into corrections, I was pretty much shell-shocked. My worldview had changed. And soon I found this path to chaplaincy. I was first an UA, I was just an office associate in corrections, but I had the opportunity to go to seminary at Central Baptist Theological Seminary, which is a seminary located, they have an adjunct in Elm Grove, Wisconsin. And it was in seminary that I really started to dive into this idea of what is the point of religion? What is the point of spirituality? How does that help the people on probation? Or how does that help the people that are incarcerated? And the truth is, I couldn't find anything in which religion was doing that specifically. Because in the end, religion, based on my studies, is more just another group of rules or laws or dogma. It's do this, don't do that. Be this, don't be that. This is right, this is wrong. But spirituality is the personal. Spirituality is something that is unique to yourself and to myself. Your spirituality is your own. My spirituality is my own. We share it, as you all are sharing together today. And you're sharing that as part of religion. But the spirituality is the experience. As I was in seminary, and maybe this will come to a shock to some of you, but when I was in seminary, that I came to the conclusion that there was likely no God. And I transitioned from a theist to a non-theist. Now, I don't like the word atheist, because I am not an anti-theist or anti-religion. I am a humanist. I'm endorsed by the Human Society. I've been endorsed by the Human Society for 2 years. And humanism, and I'm guessing most of you probably will consider yourself humanists, especially maybe religious humanists, but humanists says this. Humanists believe that as human beings, not only do we have an obligation to ourselves, but we have an obligation to everybody to make this world a better place within the tools and within the experiences that we can provide. Now, this does not mean there is the perfectibility of people, but it does mean that we're all on this life journey, and it's our responsibility to understand where people are coming from. It's our responsibility to see both sides, even if one side is errantly wrong. But humanism has allowed me to see inmates in a completely different way. Now, the topic of this topic is spirituality in prison. It's not religion in prison. And religion in prison is a topic that many people, especially that are coming from maybe conservative Christianity, will love to talk about. In fact, in a book that just recently came out this year called God in Captivity, a sociologist, and I'm drawing a blank on her name, talks about how religion right now is trying to go into all the prisons to not treat or to help them discover who they are, but to actually change and transform them and convert them into Christianity. Organizations like Prison Fellowship, they are ultimately going and not thinking about the individual and what they can do for them, but are ultimately thinking about the numbers. See, religion in prison is an area that we have some challenges with, but spirituality is what is actually going to be focusing on the inmates. Now, Sam Harris, did any of you know Sam Harris? Yeah. Woo, yeah. So Sam Harris, if you don't know, he's a neuroscientist. He's a pretty known atheist. He's actually, I don't always like him because he's anti-religious in many regards. If you ever listen to his debates with like Raza Aslan, who I like actually. But he writes in Waking Up, spirituality must be distinguished from religion because people of every faith and none have had the same sorts of spiritual experiences. While these states of mind are usually interpreted through the lens of one another's religious doctrine, we know that this is a mistake. Nothing that a Christian or a Muslim or a Hindu can experience self-transcending love, ecstasy, bliss, inner light, constitutes evidence or support for their traditional beliefs because their beliefs are logically incompatible with one another. A deeper principle must be at work. And I remember first reading this, and I'm looking at all the inmates that are there, and we have a lot of inmates. I'm not sure if you understand how many women we actually have at TCI now, but there was a time where we only had a few hundred. In fact, when I was hired 4 years ago, we had maybe around 700, but today we have 940 inmates there, and we're just keep on rising. But even within that population, we have 65% who choose Protestant, 13% who choose Catholic, 7% who choose Native American, 5% who choose pagan, 4% who choose Islam, 3% who are Eastern religions, and then another 2% that make up the no preference, other, humanists, atheists, and Gnostic, and Judaism. Judaism only has about 0.01% right now. But what is interesting of that entire population is that only about 25% of the inmates participate in any religious programming. Only 25%. Although we have a lot of people deciding what religion they can choose, only around 25% participate in religious programming. And that is somewhat close to this idea of the I'm spiritual but not religious that you might be hearing about today. They say, estimate around 20 to 25% are going to adhere to spirituality but not religious. And the question is, what does that mean? I mean, how can you be spiritual and not religious? Does that mean they don't believe in God? No. Does that mean they don't partake in maybe a UU congregation or another Protestant congregation or go to Muslim to a mosque? No. But what it's saying is that they view spirituality as more significant than adhering to any particular religion. They don't want to necessarily say that, oh, I'm UU, or I'm a humanist, or I'm an evangelical Lutheran, or a Wisconsin Lutheran. They understand that their spirituality is something more. It's about the experience. And so the question that I was faced with as a chaplain, and this, I'm kind of a black sheep when it comes to chaplains within the Wisconsin Department of Corrections. I kind of give myself that title, but really I think when we added humanist, atheist, and Gnostic 4 years ago after litigation, I was like, yes! And all my other chaplains like, I don't understand. How can they be a religion? It's not a religion. They have no sense of religion. But they were putting it all on the side that spirituality can only be experienced through a religious organization. They didn't quite see or even appreciate that spirituality is so much more. But it's not just myself or Sam Harris or even you who come to this conclusion that spirituality is so much more. It's not just the women that I work with. There's many people. There's, in fact, a Benedictine monk, Brother David, writes in The Music of Silence that sometimes people get the mistaken notion that spirituality is a separate department of life, the penthouse of our existence. But rightly understood, it is a vital awareness that pervades all realms of our being. Someone will say, I come alive when I listen to music, or I come to life when I garden, or I come alive when I play golf. Wherever we come alive, that is the area in which we are spiritual. And then we can say, I know at least how one is spiritual in that are to be vital, aware in all areas of our lives, is the task that is never accomplished, but always remains a goal. When people come to prison, you may hear, and maybe you even thought this yourself, there's many that say everybody finds God when they're in prison. And I mean, why is that? I mean, I don't know if you guys do open, but why would someone always find God while in prison? Anyone want to guess out here?
Help them get out.
Help them get out. Yeah, anybody else?
Comfort.
Comfort? I think comfort is one of the biggest things. Yes?
I was thinking they had time to think about things.
I'm sorry, what was it?
They had time to think about it.
Yeah, and they do have, we're going to talk about that, they have a lot of time to think about it. There's a saying in prison, actually, that in some cases, prison is more freeing than the prisons we make for ourselves on the outside. Because women, when they come to TCI, it's an intake facility, they literally sit in a cell for around 7 weeks with very little time for outside contact. That has changed a bit since I've been there. But a majority of the time when a woman first gets to TCI, when they're at their weakest moment, when they are like deer in headlights, they are sitting in a cell with some person they do not know who may have a worse crime or a better crime, if you want to put it that way. And they're left with their thoughts. They're left with their guilt. They're left with their shame. They're left with questions of, where do I go from now? How do I be a mother from inside these gates? And so many of them turn to the one thing they've heard throughout most of their lives, is they turn to God. Because, you know, this understanding of God in many of the religious aspects is this: God sees me for who I am and will forgive me even though I can't forgive myself. But religion can play that comfort zone for them. Where the problem sometimes comes, or often does, is that we use religion. We use this forgiveness that we often experience in Islam from Allah, in Christianity from God, or even an understanding within Buddhism of being awakened, which is not quite the same, but we'll go there. When you become a Buddha or have that Buddha moment, that awakened moment, is that we and many people, especially in prison, will hide behind that experience. They will hide behind that knowledge and not look inwards to what really led them to this path that they've gone to. In fact, as I think some of you know, here in the United States, we have the highest recidivism rate of any other developed country. We incarcerate more people than any other developed country around by a lot. And I don't want to get into, I'm speaking on behalf of DOC today, so I don't want to get into some of the challenges of incarceration. But spirituality is in many regards the answer that many of these women are looking for. Because Lama Surya Day, in a wonderful book on Buddhism, if you're ever interested in reading Buddhism, it's called Awakening the Buddha Within. He writes that spirituality is a matter of self-discovery rather than of becoming something else. Because sometimes in religion, we're told this is what you need to be. But we don't always understand, well, why do I have to be that? Whereas the Lama Day is saying, no, spirituality is about really discovering who I am. Who is that looking back at me in the mirror? Is the person looking back in the mirror the person that I think that I am? And here at TCI, we have actually expanded some of the programming in regards to spiritual experience. Such as adding a mindfulness class that teaches meditation, to start teaching and allowing the women the opportunity to dive into themselves, to kind of see what makes them tick. Why did they make the decision that they made that landed them here? And sometimes for the first time in their lives, they start to see something that is completely beautiful. Their whole life, they saw a mistake, but they start to see that, you know what, this mistake is something that can be beautiful. Arthur James writes in Mindfulness Exercises that spirituality is in between the mind and the heart. Spirituality exists within a unique, unbreakable relationship between the heart and the mind. It is the internal harmony that allows one to endure the most harrowing of circumstances. I gotta look at my notes because I changed the names of the people I was talking about. Joyce, Joyce who stabbed her husband, had hid. You know, it was kind of funny. We had the story about lying. So thank you, Steve. Thank you, because Joyce had lied to herself for the longest time. She had told the judge before her incarceration, even after incarceration, that she did not do it. She does not know how her husband got stabbed. It was an accident. It just happened to maybe fall down, and it just went, that way. And she was really involved with her religious preference. I'm not going to say what it was, but she had come to this understanding that, you know what? Yeah, there was something wrong in my life, but I'm not going to deal with it. I'm forgiven. I can move on from here. But she found that herself was completely broken still. She was still crying at night, even though she was known as this great person in the prison. It wasn't until she discovered Buddhism that she started to actually look into herself. That she started to discover, you know what, she came to the understanding that, yes, I did stab my husband, but not just how or why, but she started to understand that, you know what, there's more to this story than just that action at that moment in time. This has to do with my childhood. This has to do with the abuse that I experienced. This has to do with my own fears. And so she found, actually, through meditation and through Buddhism, while diving into herself, that she could come to not only forgive herself, but also kind of accept and move forward. And you may be surprised by this, but she actually was able to rekindle her relationship with her husband. She's still in prison, but her husband now comes and visits with her children on a regular basis, which I am sometimes dumbfounded by. But it took her kind of letting go of her pre-understanding of what religion is meant to be. She just saw it in the rules. She just saw it in do this, don't do that, thou shalt. She didn't see it at that moment as something that's supposed to encourage an understanding of the self. And when she had that experience with Buddhism, that's when she saw a spiritual transformation. Now, I used to do a talk, and this is a whole nother lecture. But at TCI, one of the things that I have come to understand is the importance of the wellness wheel. Has anybody come across the wellness wheel in your line of work, sociology, psychology? No? Yes. All right. So, and there's different iterations about the wellness wheel. But the wellness wheel says for you to have, and for me and for the inmates to have a whole fulfilling life, that we need to keep our life in balance. And for a lot of women, when they come to TCI, and in fact, a lot of my volunteers that are religious volunteers, they think or believe that religion, or specifically spirituality in the wellness wheel, is the only thing that will get them through these moments in time. But the wellness wheel teaches no, that's not true. In fact, a lot of women and men in the male facilities, what they do is they overinflate spirituality. They focus so much on the concept of God or on self-awareness that they forget everything else in the wellness wheel. And in the wellness wheel, there's other aspects of, besides spirituality, there is financial, there is relationships, there's intellectual, there's physical. And they ultimately find that as they are diving into their own religion, or spirituality, they are still not finding that whole self. What is most interesting and surprising to me, and I'm going to conclude because I'm sorry I'm already running late here, is that there's a lot that you and I can learn from people who are incarcerated. And I said it before, there is a saying, I mean, we hear this a lot, is that the prisons we make ourselves on the outside is a much bigger and harder prison to break out of than the prison that the women here at TCI find themselves. See, for most of us, and maybe, I mean, I'm going to speak about me, but for a lot of us, we don't take the time to be quiet. We don't take the time to sit in silence. We don't sit and contemplate where we're going or what it is. And it was very exciting to hear, and I'm drawing a blank on her name, but talking about the Eagles, because in that moment, Tracy, thank you, I see your name tag now.
Oh, good job.
It's in those moments that we actually not only discover who we are, but we also discover our place in it all. And I'm encouraged by a lot of the work that UU is doing here, because it's not just focused inward on this congregation. It actually feels like it's going all outward. Because we all do share this experience with one another. But the challenge that I have for all of you and for myself is to no longer see, I don't know, us or them, but just to see other people who are trying to experience life. I'm going to leave just one more story with you of an inmate. This inmate was a pastor's daughter. She grew up in the church. She grew up as a pastor's daughter. And she always heard stories of people having these amazing experiences encountering God, where they just are in complete awe and wonder. But she never experienced this experience. She always heard about it. She always wanted it, but she never felt the things that she was supposed to feel. Until she picked up the Quran. She picked up the Quran, and she found complete beauty within the texts that were familiar to her, but she found a connection to Allah that she had never connected with God before, or through Jesus. And so she actually converted to Islam. And to my surprise, her father, seeing a transformation in herself, seeing that she actually was experiencing what he had so longed for her to experience, but even in another religion, totally accepted her transformation. And they're obviously talking today. We never know where we're going to be. We never know who we're going to meet. We never know the choices we're going to make based on what's going to happen. But it's our responsibility to encourage everyone around us to be their true self, to not put them into a box like I did so long ago of us versus them. And it's through spiritual practice and experiences that our minds will be awake, and the minds of the women who are at TCI start to really understand that they, even within their crimes, have a place in this world and a place in this community. And it's our challenge, though, to understand that too, and not write everybody off like the majority of our most of our community does. I thank you for your time. I hopefully didn't speak too fast and I jumped around a little bit. But yeah, do we have questions or is that afterwards?
I think after.
Okay.
Given the timing here.